Hello, every folks, and welcome to another one of these. Alright, so today we are going to be doing my favorite of the series, arguably the most balanced of the series. I say arguably, it is the most balanced of the series. Good old Knight of Lodis here. So yeah, if you've played the rest of the Ogre games, but you've never tried Knight of Lodis, you know what, just go do it. Just go do it right now. But if you have, well, if for some reason you're in need of a tier list, here it is. So yeah, for those that never looked through it, basically Knight of Lodis is the one where they went and looked at their game and they thought, you know what, I think balance is something we're going to try this time, and so they did, and a miracle was born. A surprisingly fleshed out GBA SRPG here. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. To briefly kind of introduce stuff here, this is all going to be based off personal opinions, off of challenge running this thing since I was a little kid, well, as well as some other information that will occasionally play a part. For clarification, there's really only 3 stats in this game, for the most part, that determine what everybody can do, and everybody will be rated based off performance, how easy they are to get, how easy they are to use, etc. Alright, so first off, over here, basic soldier guys, always going to be one of my favorites. Unfortunately, they're hanging out in D tier this time around. They're pretty much tied for some of the lowest stat gains of the game, which are fairly important for Knight of Lodis. Even if you're at bottomed out damage, you still usually get some mercy points as far as all that goes, but yeah, no, they have some of the worst of everything as far as everything goes. They have no weapon specialties, they have no abilities, they have no spells, they really don't have anything other than use item abilities and the ability to swing a weapon. Still one of my favorites, but, you know, they're a little bit lackluster. Now, next one on the list here, archers. Well, it's almost like somebody took a look at the original SNES game, and, well, later on the PSP remake, funnily enough, and thought, hey, you know what? Wow, archers were really strong in that one. I think we need to just pound them into a complete pulp until they don't work. So, with those 3 stats in this game, basically, whether they go for strength, intelligence, or agility. I mean, they also have gains for, like, health and MP and all that kind of thing. So agility is the one that determines accuracy and movement range. So if everybody else was specializing in one thing or the other, these guys are your agility specialists, pretty much at the expense of anything else. They're tied with the basic soldiers in terms of their strength growths. But they get their agility bonus as well as a specialization in bows. Now the thing is, despite this, for whatever reason, basic soldiers actually seem better at using bows than they are. The main thing with archers is that while they will do next to no damage pretty much the entire game, no matter what weapons you give them, I've actually seen them like legitimately hit 20s with a snapdragon. It's kind of amazing. They do seem to have like a damage reduction factor to all of their attacks, but they do have a good movement range. They're pretty much never going to miss. They are consistently disappointing, but slightly above 0, if that makes sense. Wait, sorry. But yeah, very odd unit. Very snazzy looking, but definitely not very strong. All right, next we got clerics. They're in the C tier. They're going to be your mainline healer for the majority of the game until you get priests. Nothing too special about them, except for the fact that if you ever kill somebody while using a priest, they will get a unique emblem that basically says they're evil now, and then they can't become a priest anymore. So fun stuff there. Next up we got knights, good old solid A tier as always. They're boring but dependable. They can heal, they can swing, they can take a beating. They're very solid as always. But yeah, not really anything too fancy. In most cases, your basic soldiers will automatically get the requirements to become a knight with enough time. All they have to do is get counterattacked from the front enough times. Alright, next we have wizards, which I feel are also in the C tier. They're going to make a good case for themselves early on with the amount of damage they do. They're going to have a pretty decent punch, but they are very, very frail, which in Knight of Lodis, well, they're kind of countered by archers, which tend to be relatively common and also tend to like picking on them fairly often. You can give them a ton of armor pieces to try and keep them a little bit safer. Personally, I always liked running wizards with longbows. Don't know why. They're not very good, but dang it if they're not fun. So yeah, they're all right. They're not anything awful, but yeah, they're solidly in the middle there. Next we got ninjas. Once again, kind of a C tier on these ones because they're very frail. On a game that lets enemy units take this many attacks, since it's both teams moving as one unit, having a unit that can, well, that essentially ends up getting itself wrecked by a few attacks is not always going to be great. However, I mean, thinking over it, you know what? I think they deserve to be in B, actually. Because they can equip some defensive items. Well, anybody can equip anything, to be fair. The weapon they specialize in, they don't necessarily need, since you only get one over the course of the story normally, and then you can find 3 more in hidden locations. They're not awful. They're very fast. They've got very good movement range. They can move on land tiles, or on water tiles, as if they were land tiles. And they're very good for going and collecting hidden items. For those that didn't know, there's one particular tile near the barrels in the very first port fight where you can find one of the best shields in the game right off the bat if you have a ninja in your starting team. You can get ninjas fairly early on, but that's the fastest way to get it. But yeah, Dragon Shield, pretty good. A lot of times I end up giving it to them because it does give them some pretty decent defense. Alright, next up on the list, going to be Tamers. They're going to be hanging out in D tier. Reason for this is that they're basically there as a morale bonus for your dragons, as well as getting a bit of a bonus to recruiting them. I wouldn't say this is really something that's worth keeping a specialized unit around for, but they do specialize in thrusting swords, which not many classes do. So if you have a spare, you know, S-Talk or whatever else sitting around, and you just don't really have anything else to do with it, just go ahead and use them as a fencer. You know, they're kind of low-key filling the same role as the fencer from OB64 in that regard. Because in a lot of cases, I just used them as like a light duelist kind of build instead of ever actually using them for their morale bonus. All right. Actually, they also have a funny thing where if you have them kill dragons, they also get an emblem that prevents them from becoming a tamer again. Also prevents them from... actually, no, it doesn't prevent them from being a tamer, but it prevents dragons from ever trusting them, and I believe they lose their morale bonus off of it. So funny little flavor thing there. Alright, next up, we got a unit that I personally always like to use whenever possible, but man oh man, they suck, and that would be the Witch. So they've got a couple things that they can kind of sort of do. I mean, there's ways to make witches good. They can only use support spells. They don't really specialize in any weapons or anything else, and they do have a charm ability. They're very difficult to get a hold of because the default chance for you to be able to even get a witch is 4%. And that's with a unit that's already lowered. For those that didn't know, in order to unlock the witch, you have to have a female unit convince a male unit. Basically, have to seduce them to your side. So unfortunately, well, the magic hooker is a little bit hard to obtain, but they are a pretty fun unit once you get them. So Fascination is pretty good as far as a pretty reliable charm move. There aren't that many in the game. You can get the Caldia later, which basically just does the entire job of the witch for you. They also have support abilities. I mean, if you really want to metagame it, you can make a witch pretty good by, like, let's say, giving them an elemental bow, and then you give them Ray of Paralysis, and then, like, let's say, like, Zoshnal's Influence or something like that. So you basically go and you're boosting the fire element. I don't think they can use Molten Blade. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, basically you just boost fire stuff, give them a fire bow. Is it unnecessary amounts of effort for a relatively small reward? Yeah. But it's still kind of fun to do. But either way, I personally like them, but yeah, they're mostly a flavor class. Next up, we got Sirens. Solid A tier. They're basically like the magical version of Knights. They do their job well. They get access to summons. They get access to many other support abilities. They're pretty much solid attackers all around the board. Their defenses aren't awful. They do take some pretty decent punishment, so you don't want to have them too far up the front line, but they can still hold their own. Not to mention they look frickin' stylish. Yeah, they definitely look like they came out of the 80s. They're ready for their concert. Next up, we got the Dragoon. This one is one of the first S tiers here. So, originally I was thinking A tier for this one, because they're very similar to Knight, except they've got missile spells instead of heals. But heals you can accomplish from items just as well, so it's not really nearly as important in KOL. However, They do have bonuses against dragons and beasts, which you don't tend to run into that often, but just the fact that they're better fighters across the board already means you're already going to have them in your front line. They're already worth using, not to mention they've got unique moves for finishing somebody off with a spear or sword. So that looks cool as hell. Like, if they know they're going to get a kill, they'll basically throw their sword in the air, and as it's dropping down, grab it and slap it on somebody. It's pretty fantastic. Or they just do a couple extra spins of their spear. But they're also one of the few that specialize in spears, which are definitely one of the top-tier weapons in KOL. Yet another reason I friggin' love this game. So yeah, very solid, easy S tier there. Next, we have one that can vary quite a bit. If you end up boosting them all the way, they could potentially be an S or an A tier. I personally feel like on average they wind up on the B tier here. So the Warlock is a support frontliner. Basically, they're relatively frail, but they're pretty quick. They've got they specialize in swords, and especially combining magic with swords. They've got some pretty high MP costs, unfortunately. So that's kind of their big drawback there. But like Baron Soul is basically they just take their element, slap it on a weapon, and slap somebody with it. If you've got opposing elements, that can do a hell of a lot of damage. They can use Molten Blade, which is pretty dang strong. So yeah, they can use a lot of different combos. They can teleport themselves later. Like, they're solid. They just take some setup. So I feel like on average, just the kind of complications it takes for them to be good lands them in B tier. Personally, just on sheer cool factor, they would be an S tier, because them suckers have the coolest sword animation in the game. Like, to this day, I've played this game since I was a little kid. To this day, every time that Christmas runs around, I still find myself just kind of automatically doing that with a wrapping paper roll every time Christmas rolls around. Anywho, moving on. Next S tier here. The Lady S tier, the other one that specializes in spears, the Valkyrie. However, she's better than the Dragoon, as weird as that sounds. Her stats are worse. However, she specializes in spears also. Has better access magic-wise. Is still just as bulky, and the funny part is, there's a hidden benefit. They don't see it. Well, there's two hidden benefits. A, they boost morale of all male units nearby, which is usually going to be most of your team. And B, they have snow movement type. That doesn't sound like it'd be that useful until the entire game freezes over in the latter half, and suddenly, you know, it helps to have a goat, like a magical spear goat, as the head of your team. I always end up running one of these. Definitely one of my favorite and one of the strongest classes in the game. Next up, I would argue their male counterpart, more so than the Dragoon, maybe, would be the Swordmaster. So they're going to be they're pretty much tied as far as offensive growths with the Dragoon. They kind of lose out on some of the cool factor, on top of basically just having a bathrobe instead of like shiny golden armor. They do have a stun move for their throw. They've got access to some support abilities. They have the lengthiest sword animation in the game, which is, personally I would consider it a downside, but that's up to you. Specialize in katanas or swords, so whatever you kind of happen to have laying around, they can probably use it. Very solid class. Surprisingly bulky considering they don't wear armor, but, you know, pretty dang good is the thing. Not to mention, I like to give them warp rings, because they've got some friggin' movement range on them. So, very good there. Alright, next up we got another E tier. This is going to be the Octopus. So, here's the thing. The Mermaid is going to go there because both of these are going to be for the same reason. In the water, they are terrifying. Like, I'm pretty sure most people that have played through this game ended up losing a couple units on their first time through in the Rana Sea. Right? Then, you know, maybe a few of them, like my idiot self as a kid, thought, wow, that's pretty good. I gotta get me some of those. And so, you know, you wind up with like 2 mermaids and an octopus, and you're like, oh man, I'm gonna go rock the rest of the game using these 2. And then the game freezes. As in the entire map freezes over, and there's, like, for example, I think my favorite moment was during one of the Astoria fights. That there was, you know, I sent in the team against Margaret's team there. And so 6 guys run forward, and it's just the octopus and the mermaid sitting in the moat in the very front, because the second that they walk out, they're gonna die. Because they take such a hard hit to their stats as soon as they leave the water. It's literally like 50%. I mean, I've actually had mermaids get insta-killed by just basic archers just trying to leave the water before. On that map in particular. So, yeah, they've got a pretty major detriment there, is the thing. Alright, so next up, speaking of well, no longer humanoid type stuff, we've got the dragons. So we've got the blue dragon here. Personally feel they're a C tier. They're really slow. They've got a lot of defense on them, but they've got a slow or a sleep effect on their breath. It's strong enough, but it's usually just annoying to use them, just because of how slow they are. I feel like right above them would be thunder dragons, since they've got a stun effect on them. Like sleep you can wake up from, stun you cannot wake up from. They're probably disabled for several rounds. So they're at least worth the effort in most cases. In the E tier, though, we have... Well, actually, I guess they deserve D tier. We have the Earth Dragons. Poison is just a really iffy effect. Like, everyone's only gonna get hit by it once per round. If you've got enough of it around, okay, it can be devastating, but realistically, for the most part, it's just... Like, if you're gonna have a dragon, use one of the other ones. It's easily the worst of those. We have the Fire Dragon up after that. That's got a confusion effect on its breath. I'd argue it's about similar to Sleep, where, you know, it might help you, it might not. But still, potentially disabling for those two. And then, yeah, Poison is just meh. And then, we have the ones that are entirely determined on alignment. So these are pretty fun. We've got the Mothus up here, your good boy dragon. Gives you a morale bonus to everybody that's nearby, regardless of what they are. And they just retain their original effect, so if you got like a Thunder Dragon, you turn them into a Mothus, it's pretty good. Morale bonuses, it's just, they don't fly. They have wings, but they don't fly, so, I mean, they're alright. If they could fly, they'd be an easy A tier, but yeah, they're good, they're defensive. They're not going to be mind-blowing, but they are pretty nice to have around. It's just you lose that morale bonus more often than not, because everybody else is outspeeding them. Next we have the Naga. Alright, that gets to be in D tier next to this thing. The only thing saving it from E tier is just how frickin' cool it looks. You still have the same breath effect as before. You have slightly higher stats than a regular dragon, but they become water type. So yeah. Hope you like the fact that most of the game is frozen. Anywho, next up we have the first A-tier dragon. That's going to be your Vritra. It can fly. It's really bulky. It's got some solid stats on it across the board. It's got a lot of beef. Pretty darn fantastic. And then we have the zombie dragon, which is literally just a zombie version of the same thing. You can get one of these if you've got Necromancy. Getting Necromancy is a bit of a pain in the neck, so we're just going to go ahead and drop that down to D tier. It's a very good dragon, but actually, let's put it in C. I mean, it's just the fact that you're like, I believe it lowers their stats slightly, and you also you got to deal with suddenly having a zombie. It takes forever to get Necromancy. If I recall, I've only ever gotten Necromancy once. And that was over playing this game for a friggin' like couple decades, so that should tell you how worthless that is. Anyway, just stick with your basic one. There's really no reason to have it turn into a zombie. Alright, next up we got the Griffin. I feel like that's a solid B tier. They've got a lot of movement range on them. They've got some good bulk to them. They've got a big AoE wind move that they get later on in the game, and early on they're usually just tough enough to be able to fly straight into a group of enemies and peck away at all their faces. They are angry, you can definitely see that from their face, and yeah, they've got the stats to back it up. A little bit behind that, I feel, is the Cockatrice. So they're a little bit, I would say stat-wise they're very similar, it's just that their Stone Breath tends to not be as reliable as the Tornado. So you don't have as much AoE with the Stone Breath, and also just the fact that they seem to be a little bit less bulky across the board. Petrification's nice. It's just really, if you're going to go for one, usually Griffins are going to be the one to go for, at least in my personal opinion. Next we got the Cerberus. Again, another C tier for the monster units there. Confusion's a cool effect. They've got some pretty decent movement range, they've got some pretty decent attack on them. They're basically, you know what, actually they get to be B tier, because they're an upgraded version of the Fire Dragon for all intents and purposes. They're not as bulky, but they're going to be easier to use, they're going to get their effects off more often. Not to mention you don't see them getting stuck when there isn't a tiny little gap for them to jump up on top of. So that's nice. Alright, next up on D tier, we have Giants. Some of the highest health growth in the game, some of the highest strength growth in the game. It's too bad they can never hit anything. Like, their accuracy is appallingly bad, to the point where, like, I like to think of them as kind of like a sucky version of Golems in the PSP remake for Tactics Ogre. So, the way that they did Golems is they've got pretty much the same thing, that they're really slow, they have a hard time hitting anything, they've got an extreme amount of bulk to them. However, on that one, accuracy bottomed out at 25%. So eventually they would keep swinging and they would hit something. In this case, I've seen an average hit rate of like 11% for their boulder throw. Sure, it's probably an insta-kill if it hits, but this thing is like the walking embodiment of guillotine from Pokemon or something. Like, it's really weird. So usually their best use is to actually get them, give them a bunch of emblems. Like, for example, if you have them punch a fairy, they will get War God. Or no, they'll get Berserk instantly. It'll boost their already ridiculous strength even higher. So if you ever wanted to make them somewhat viable, give them some armlets of agility, and then suddenly you have something that can hit pretty darn good. But yeah, then you take all of that crazy mess and you turn it into a Snapdragon, and then you give that to somebody, and congratulations, you don't have to worry about using a giant anymore because they are now a sword. So yeah, pretty dandy there. Next we've got Gremlins, also in the D tier. They've got a Confusion move, they've got a Petrify move. Usually they die to a couple of hits. Nothing too special, bit of a pain to get a hold of. Solid meh across the board. Next A tier unit. Probably won't believe me on this, but fairies. As strange as it sounds, I thought fairies were absolutely unforgivably bad, which in many ways they are, up until I did a fairy-only run. Because they have stuff that they don't even tell you about. One thing that should be said to start off with, I'm pretty sure they have a permanent damage scaling penalty, so stuff seems to automatically hit them for more damage no matter what. However, their agility is freakishly high, to the point where they're just, I mean, they literally have 1% hit chance against them in the end game when it comes to a lot of stuff. So guaranteed hit moves are going to be really strong against them, but anything that's even got a slight accuracy issue is going to have an even harder time touching them. But here's the crazy part. Their Kiss move, if you've got a couple of them, they've got a turn reset move that allows them to transfer their turn to somebody else. Okay, that's already awesome because it allows your best unit attack twice. What they don't tell you is that it's got its same effect from OB64, which is that it seems to give them approximately 1 level of a bonus, or about, like, I don't know, 7 or 8% extra damage every time that they use it. And I only realized this when I was sitting there at the last boss. I had one fairy that was doing like 40 damage to the last boss with a Snapdragon, and then I used one fairy on it. Suddenly they're doing like 44. Have another one come in, they're suddenly doing 50. Have another one come in, like, wait a minute, why is their damage going up repeatedly? And yeah, ultimately they were swinging around 150s after all this setup was done. So you can pull off some crazy stuff using them. But yeah, you can abuse that speed like crazy. Magic Missile's pretty solid. Like, they're good. They're surprisingly good. They're very defensively weak, but they're surprisingly good. Alright, next we got Ghosts. They go in the E tier. They're usually there as fodder you slap into the ground and never talk to again. I mean, you can recruit them. They always look like they're about to go, go ask if you want a little cup of coffee or something. Like, sir, I know I'm a little floating bathrobe, but do you need anything? Can I help you out with anything? Just wanted to make sure you're doing okay. They was like a little bit concerned more than spooky, I feel. But yeah, they're just there slamming or spamming sleep moves and stuff like that. But yeah, usually pretty easy to slap back to the ground. They're very rarely going to be more than a nuisance, but they do keep coming back, so there's that. Next up we got regular old zombies, actually, speaking of them. These always show up in basic start-of-the-game equipment. They're there kind of as a tragedy mascot more than anything else, so yeah. They get to just hang out over there. Very easy to actually beat. It's pretty cathartic to go through the zombie forest in this one. Every one of these games has a zombie forest, and this one I feel is always the most... It's kind of the creepiest, to be honest. Alright, next we got another A tier here, and that's going to be the Hawkman. Solid damage. They specialize in hammers. Pretty much nobody does that. They actually started the whole Holt hammer thing, which it's questionable, but there's a theory that that's possibly a MC Hammer reference. Either way, yeah, solid units. They get that cool lightning fireball thing later on as they level up. I mean, you get a flyer. You don't get too many flyers in this game. But yeah, excellently made unit. I will say I personally always like running them with like a two-hander and just kind of doing a little Legend of Dragoon cosplay kind of thing with these guys. But yeah, I was a weird little kid that liked Legend of Dragoon, so there we go. Fun unit to play around with. Next we got another S tier, and that would be the Angel Knights. Anyone can become one. They're fairly easy to obtain. You just have to have the right stats, Guide of the Fallen Angel, and a couple of Resurrection Altars, which you start the game with. So relatively easy to get a hold of. You just have to get their stats up a little bit. You have to get their alignment up a little bit. Excellent unit. They're basically everything that the Hawkman can do, but better, and they specialize in thrusting swords, and later on in the game you get a whole bunch of the best thrusting sword with no questions asked. However, you can pretty much make them into anything, and they'll excel at it. They've got some exorcism moves, they've got some pretty strong songs on them. Just excellent unit across the board. However, anybody changed into them does permanently stay an angel, just so you know. Alright, next up we have another A tier, and that would be the Priest. So, they get access to offensive casts and summons, as well as some of the better healing abilities. Just pretty much a natural progression off of your standard healers. Pretty strong, reasonably bulky in a lot of cases. I usually like running female clerics because the male portrait looks... well, they look like they're going to be showing up on the news. But yeah, which, by the way, speaking of, I just want to say... The sprite work in this game is just it's fantastic. I just love the sheer mix of different expressions and everything else that's constantly going on. It's so colorful, you know. I love it, absolutely love it. But yeah, so Priests pretty solid. Next up we got another S tier, and that would be Richter, the High Priest, basically an upgraded priest with some melee components thrown in. Specializes in thrusting. Usually I like to give him Clotho by the end of the game. I mean, he's a unique character. He's going to be pretty solid. Generally going to be one of the best hybrid classes in the game. Usually just thrusting swords, some type of heal, and usually like Igneous Fatus or something. So, yeah. Obvious S tier on that, which, speaking of S tiers, Lich on the evil side here. Got to keep that that one represented. Nigh immortal, a bit of a pain to get a hold of, but that doesn't even matter, because seriously, like, nothing can friggin' kill him. Not to mention the fact that if you're redecorating, the end of the game proves that these guys can actually turn into a carpet, so there we go. You're redecorating your house, you can have your security wizard just sitting right there as your floor accessory. Beautiful. Nobody will see it coming. Alright, next up we got the Shaman. See, I feel like she's a, like... Okay, just due to utility and everything else, we'll put her in B tier. She's a really good caster in her own right, but she has a unique ability to transfer her MP to somebody else, or her HP as MP to somebody else. So she kind of becomes almost necessary in the end game to keep up summon spam. She's ridiculously strong as far as that goes. Okay, she's not necessary, but she was really, really good. Like, fluid magic is something pretty much anyone can use. Actually, you can even use a Warlock as a MP source for some of your summoners as well, if you don't want them using their MP. But yeah, she can make sure that you're summoning, summon spamming right off the bat, because she's meant to team up with her dad, who would normally be in the A tier. He's got some of the best magic stats in the game. Dude comes in with some good summons, he comes in with some good gear. In the process of getting him, you unlock one of the Snapdragons. However, he is, well, he's very strongly implied to be a pedophile, so he gets to go down in the E tier. Next up, we got his replacement, though, and that would be Sybil. Easily, probably the best caster in the game. Next to the Lich. Like, I'm putting her deliberately underneath the Lich. Actually, no, screw it. She has to be on the same level as the Lich. She's not very bulky. She definitely takes a pretty solid beating when it comes to anything physical there, but like, as far as casting, she can be an absolute powerhouse. Plus, she comes in with all the spells that you could ever need for her. So there's that. Alright, next we got Eleanor. She's an A tier. Basically, she is your second protagonist. However, she has an ability, Star Tiara, that basically makes her the princess of this game. Because that's basically the same thing that they did in March of the Black Queen. That said, she forgets that ability as soon as she uses it, which is kind of funny because she usually immediately levels up and relearns it. It's pretty much made to not be spammed, although you can easily spam it. Just because if you keep her under-leveled, she's basically got infinite uses of it. She's just a walking nuke. So yeah, if you ever wanted a thermonuclear girlfriend, that is Eleanor. That's why she gets... if you want to make sure that you get the best ending for the game, just always go the B route. It's just the best ending. I really don't care if it completely invalidates the rest of the plot line. That is the best route to go. Alright, next up we got another S tier, and that'd be Deneb. She's basically a hidden witch. If you didn't know how to get her, you just recruit any character from the store, just any female character, put them as a fire element, just name them Deneb, and yeah, then you just train them up to be a witch. And as soon as you train them up, instead of being one of these, they'll be one of these, and they're a witch with a heart on it, and suddenly they get access to pretty much every spell in the game. They are ridiculously busted, and there you go. All right. So next up, some of these are repeats, by the way. That is just a weird thing of the tier site that happened. I'm not sure why. So we'll just put these down here. Next up, we've got some NPC-only classes. So yeah, for NPC-only, I mean, we've got these guys over here. Your bandits. You can't use them as the player, but you do run into them in a few of the random fights, as well as the few of the plot fights. Basically, they're just a soldier with slightly higher strength stats that specializes in axes. It's really their axe specialization that tends to make them a little bit stronger than you'd expect. They're basically like a Swordmaster for axes. That's kind of the way to put them there. You can cheat them into the game, but it's really not worth doing. Just give a knight an axe and you've got the same effect. They're basically a flavor character. Next up, we have Saya, the demon, which I guess I probably could have just put Saya's portrait here. I kind of feel like they're a D tier. Well, actually, no, they're a C tier. They're not bad as far as damage goes. They're an axe specialist. It's just, I think they're the only axe specialist that you can actually hire. But yeah, I don't know. They're basically just like the bandit, more or less. They're strong, but they can't fly, even though they have wings. You basically only ever get one, and you have to recruit. In order to get them, you have to get rid of Lobelia, which is already a mistake. Actually, for that reason, I think they deserve to be in D tier, because you really should just get Lobelia. All right, next up we have Dark Angels. Yeah, I feel like they're an A tier. They're a good attacker, good fighter in general, but they only get access to Bane spells, which are just arguably worse than Angel Knights in every way. I feel like they're a B tier. Like, they tend to lose fairly quickly in most runs, especially because there's only a couple of them. They're basically suckier flyer units. And then we have Duke Knights, which are showing up in their A tier. They're basically like Dragoons, but they're also kind of like Knights. You can't use them, so automatically down a tier. However, they're pretty bulky. They tend to kind of be loot pinatas in a way. Just because, well, I mean, that's literally what they are in a lot of cases. Like, for example, in order to get the Fire Drake or the Some Manus during the Astoria fight, you specifically have to go beat up one of them, and usually you're better off just avoiding them. They're not necessarily super threatening damage-wise, but you know, they're really, really difficult to get a hold of, or to get taken down. So yeah. If you feel like getting rid of them, you can get their sweet loots. Alright, next up we got Gorgons. I feel like they're on C. No, I feel like they're actually kind of in... let's put them in A tier, because their Petrify move is pretty handy. No, you know what? No. They get to be in C, because getting one is kind of an adventure all on its own. Their Petrify move is strong. They're not statistically horrible in any way. It's just, you know, they're kind of weird. But yeah, just due to the difficulty of obtaining them, we're just going to put them in C. Petrify move's pretty good. Kind of nothing else going on there otherwise. And then we have Mr. Edgelord Shaher over here. I feel like they would have to be an S tier. They are the final boss after all. They basically can inflict every debuff at once. They can summon additional units. I think they might be a little bit overpowered or something. They're not terribly balanced, especially not emotionally. But okay, so that's about that. that would be all of the classes for Knight of Lodis. I actually remembered Gremlins this time, so, you know, go me on that one. Wait, did I? Yes, I did. They're right over here. So definitely far more far more leveled out as far as classes go. They're really all across the board. They've all got different stuff going on for them. Honestly, even a lot of the stuff in the E tier, I feel like, is there for a particularly good reason. I mean, honestly, archers, I've done archer-only runs before. They were still perfectly usable. There really aren't any complete failure classes or anything. It's just, like, you get some that are just there as a gimmick, you know, or as a mascot or whatever else. Like, for example, like the octopi and the mermaids and stuff, yeah, they're not great on land or anything, but when you do fight them in their element, they're pretty dang strong. It's just the fact that the latter half of the game doesn't really utilize them. So, oh, actually, it should be noted, mermaids and octopi are actually potentially very good for quest mode, because there are a couple of the maps that do use a lot of water. But, anywho, that's about that. Now that I think about it, I wonder if there's a way to get multiplayer working. I have never once seen what the multiplayer map selection in this game looks like. Crap, I gotta see how much these cartridges are. Maybe I can... Maybe it's possible with emulation or something. I don't know. Something to look into. So I'm gonna go do that, and yeah, you guys have a good one. Take care. Thank you for watching.